Hi, in this video I will show you how to connect the Power Platform to pretty much any business API that you might want to demonstrate. In my example, it's going to be the NASA astronomy picture of the day, which is a great example of something that people do not expect us to have an out-of-the-box connector for. So as an example of a service that I would like to connect to, I have used today the astronomy picture of the day API from NASA. As you can imagine, this is not the primary business data source that our customers could connect to, but it's a beautiful way to illustrate uh, using an example that everybody would reasonably assume we do not have in the Power Platform, how easy it could be to connect to pretty much any kind of service. So again, I have used the NASA Open API. You can go to api.nasa.gov to browse the available APIs, and among them, there is one called Astronomy Picture of the Day. It's a very simple API. You retrieve this request here, and you get a link to a beautiful image with some description, with some title, and we will use that to connect to our Power Platform. So I begin my demonstration by going to the website for Power Apps, logging in and opening up the menu Data and then Custom Connectors. I'm now creating a custom connector from blank, and I will call this the NASA APOD, which stands for Astronomy Picture of the Day. To set up the connector, you need to upload a connector icon. This is, of course, not a mandatory step, but your connector will look much more beautiful. And you need to provide a host name that we will be calling. I know from the NASA API page that the host name is api.nasa.gov. In the next step, I need to provide authentication details, meaning how every user of my custom connector is going to prove that they know that they have the necessary permission from NASA to obtain data from them. In my case, this is provided by means of an API key, which every user of mine is going to obtain individually. However, I, as the administrator of the service of the Power Platform, need to explain to the Power Platform how to pass this key later to the NASA web page. In this case, the parameter will be called API key, and it's going to be passed through the query, which is an example of information that NASA would provide to you when you sign up for the service. Next, I need to define an action, which is the step that will be visible, for example, in Flow or in Power Apps, if somebody wants to use this connector. And my action is going to be called Get Astronomy Picture of the Day, short Get APOD. To define this service, two sets of information are necessary. One is the request, which is how Power Apps will request information from NASA, what kind of information needs to be passed to retrieve this information. And the second is response, which is how it will look like when NASA provides us with an astronomy picture. In my case, I have the URL for the web service, and the URL is, I'll be calling api.nasa.gov/planetary/apod. This is again a website URL that you will retrieve from NASA documentation if you're interested in more details. And all I have to do is say I'm going to do a get for this dataset. The next piece of information to provide is a sample of a response that we will be getting from NASA, and I will now pass this response. Again, this is all information I have obtained from the NASA webpage, and the response will be of type application JSON, which is a kind of computer language to describe data, and this is what the sample image looks like. I'm pasting this from the web page of NASA. Upon importing, Power Apps will now know what the response looks like and what kind of information to expect. In the next step, I will create my connector, and I could move on to testing. However, I'm sorry, just need to give it a different name. In the next step, I would move on to testing. However, there is one more little step before that is possible, and that is, in order to begin using my connector, I need to set up a connection. You might ask, what's the difference between a connection and a connector? A connector is a standard piece of information for every user of the platform, where a connection is my per user set of credentials that will be used whenever I request data from NASA. So now I'm using my custom connector, providing an API key, and my custom connector has now been created. I can move on to testing, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll get now a green light. Yeah, so my connector is ready for testing. It's ready to be used. So next we move to Power Automate to use our connector and to see if it's able to fulfill the intended goals. I will now create a custom flow. And you could use, of course, a scheduled flow to send you a beautiful astronomy picture every morning. But for today, I'm just going to use an instant flow because I want to run it immediately during my demo. So my flow is manually triggered, and if you have used Power Automate before, you probably noticed that there are built-in operations, the ones that are from inside of Flow. There are standard connectors, which are sources like Office or Teams. There are premium connectors, which are normally available if you have a premium license. And finally, we have now custom connectors, which include our custom connector for NASA. So here we have an action for getting the astronomy picture of the day. And it does not require any information. That's because NASA just provides you with this service. There's no parameter that you need to pass, like a date or like a type of an image. And if we use sending email for the next step, for example, Office Outlook, send me an email, you can now use the information passed from NASA, such as the date of the picture or the explanation or the title of the picture, in your own flow steps. So all the information that has been passed to us by NASA is now available in my flow. So in my presentation, I prefer to fast forward through the next step, which would be normally typing up some HTML code around these pieces of information to invoke the picture, to retrieve the title, the explanation, the URL to the picture. I have here just pasted some HTML code around that. And if we save our flow and execute it, we'll get a beautiful image of today's NASA headline. So I'm running my flow now. And it will call NASA on behalf of me using the user's credential. And NASA has provided us with this information. And you can see in Outlook that the Bat Nebula is the astronomy picture of the day. So summarizing, I have just in a few minutes connected. I had a business case of retrieving the pictures from NASA. I have found an API to provide me with this information. This could be any business source of yours. This could be data on-premise or in the cloud. This could be a modern system, or it could be something more outdated. It could be Microsoft Cloud. It could be any other cloud. It could be any web server that is able to provide this information. All I needed was this kind of documentation that says you need to pass an HTTP request, and this is the kind of information you can provide, and this is the kind of response you will receive. So I have obtained API key from that service. Then I have configured, by providing the security configuration and the definition of individual calls, just by passing a request, a sample request and a sample response from that service, I was able to teach Power Apps how to understand this information. then I was able to leverage this newly created operation in my flow. And this is where the boundary shows between the IT person who has made the connector available and the business person who all they need to know is I want to call NASA for that service. And again, any business service of your company could be called in just like that. Your ERP, your CRM, your custom applications, they can be used in a beautiful, simple operations out of Power Automate. Then my flow has run and it has actually retrieved this information, and then I received an email with the data obtained from an external API. Again, there is obviously no API, no standard connector in the Power Platform for NASA, and that's why I use this to demonstrate how powerful it is to connect Power Apps, Power Automate, any app from the Power Platform to an external API like this one.